All right, hi guys. We've got 16 slides to get through. I will try very hard not to be wordy. So let's just get started. The first couple is going to be forms of governance, topic 4.7 from our Unit 4 on political geography, talking specifically about federal and unitary states and what the difference is. You may have noticed in your FRQ options that one of them has to do with federal and unitary states. And so maybe this will help you answer that question. All right, let's get into it. So unitary states specifically, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Unitary states work best in nation states, okay, characterized by few internal cultural differences and a strong sense of national unity. They are more likely smaller states. Think of like a compact state, a state that is relatively uniform in size and shape, relatively small comparatively, with pretty much same culture, same language, same religion across the country. That is where you're going to find unitary states. I'm thinking specifically of France. France is a really great example of a unitary state. They have one central government located in the capital. All of the different provinces within France are, under that political system. They're under those laws, those regulations. France as a whole, they tend to consider themselves a nation state because they have adopted every French citizen into the French nationality idea. And so everyone speaks French, everyone is French. In France specifically, the overwhelming predominant religion is Catholicism, and so everyone, not everyone, but the majority of people have that in common as well. And so France is a really good case for a unitary state. They are common in Europe, all across Europe. Not every European country is a unitary system, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but many of them are because of the shape, because of the common culture, because of the common language that you see in many countries in Europe. Some multinational states, so remember multinational meaning lots of different nations within one state, have adopted unitary systems in order specifically to apply the ideas of nationality and values and the whole concept of we are all one nation, kind of what Yugoslavia tried to do with the the whole idea of yes you're Croatian, yes you're Serbian, yes you're Bosnian, whatever it is, but everyone is Yugoslavian. France does this, okay, even though not everyone in France has French ethnicity. They have kind of superseded ethnicity with this idea of nationality and that we're all French. An example is Rwanda. Rwanda does this well, I don't know if I would say well, but this is what they are trying to accomplish, that, we are all Rwandan. We're not going to worry about the tribe that we're coming from or the cultural background and differences that we have. We are just going to all be Rwandan. Now, the opposite unitary state is a federal state. The United States is an example of federalism. Many large countries especially, okay? So in federalism, in federal states, local governments have authority to adopt their own laws. And there's going to be some sort of tiered system. So local governments will be over things that specifically apply to their citizens that may not apply to citizens in a different area of the country, or that the citizens in a different area of the country might choose something different, okay? So local governments, when I say local governments, I generally refer to, in our case, in the United States case, this would be our state governments, okay? Not the actual government of Riverton or the government of Bluffdale, but the government of the state of Utah. So local governments have the authority to adopt their own laws. In the United States, local government laws include things like education, transportation, infrastructure, all of those things tend to be handled on a local or state level, not on a countrywide federal level. Okay. Multinational states may adopt federal systems to empower different nationalities, especially if those nationalities live in different regions of the country. So when you guys were doing the devolution case studies, you noticed that in Spain especially, you have the nations of Galicia and Catalonia and the Basque that are all in very kind of compact areas, right? They're not scattered or dispersed all the way through Spain. They're in a very specific area of the country. And all three of those are kind of far from the central government of Spain. And so in Spain, you see federalism because it allows those separate nations to have some level of power over certain decisions, okay? Which it's almost like giving them enough power so that they are happy with the situation and that they won't continue to make trouble or make noise or want to, start a war or, want to completely separate from the country. The thought is that if we give them enough power and enough authority over enough things, that we will keep them happy and, the calls for separation will be kept to a minimum. Federalism is well suited for large states, and pretty much every country in the world that is considered large is a federal system. So the United States, Russia, Canada, Brazil, India, all federal systems. Okay, the idea that you're going to have different types of people in different parts of the country where the needs and the focuses are going to be different. And so allowing certain decisions to be made on a more local level allows the government to better, meet the needs of their citizens. Okay, and federalism offers that idea. Okay, so hopefully now that we've gone over unitary and federal, we have a better understanding of what the differences are. They're basically opposite. Unitary states are centralized with one strong central government, and everyone in the country is under the purview and regulations of that central government. Whereas in federal states, you have a central government, but the powers and authority of that central government are delegated, basically, delegated out to local governments in certain situations so that those local governments can better meet the needs, the different and diverse needs of the people under their particular jurisdiction. Okay. All right. In between topic 4.7 and topic 4.9 is devolution, topic 4.8. We've already covered that in class, so I'm just going to skip ahead to topic 4.9, which is challenges to sovereignty. Devolution is one of them, and we talked about that a little bit already. We're going to go over that more today in this video. And then the other challenge to sovereignty that we're going to talk about is supranationalism. So let's start with what the definition of sovereignty is to begin with, so that we know what it is we're challenging. So sovereignty is the political power, or the power of a political unit or government to rule over its own affairs. So within the borders of a country or a state, they get to make the decisions for themselves. No one else gets to come in and tell them what to do. No one else gets to make decisions for them. They are in charge of their progress and policies and laws and all of that stuff. Okay, that's sovereignty. So now we're looking at challenges to sovereignty. So one of them is devolution, and we see devolution specifically when states, it's this one over here on the left, when states fragment into autonomous or semi-autonomous regions. That's a sign of devolution, where we're starting to see the power of a country level government be usurped in some way. Okay, so devolution is when those states have fragmented into autonomous or semi-autonomous regions, and we saw those when you did your case studies on Spain, Belgium, Canada, and Nigeria. Spain specifically, you see different cultural backgrounds, different languages even, of these various nations within the country of Spain. And so Spain has chosen to grant some autonomy to those different culture groups. This is the Basque and the Catalonians and the Galicians, in order to help keep the peace and help make sure that those members of the country of Spain feel heard, seen, feel like they have some authority or some say in what decisions get made, especially as they pertain to those particular nations. In Belgium, we see the difference between the Flemish and the Wallonians, and the kind of caste idea that goes with that. In Belgium specifically, they have adopted multiple official languages in order to help combat the feeling of separatism that we get between the Wallonians and the Flemish. And so Belgium is seeking additional ideas in order to allow people to govern themselves while still feeling like they are part of Belgium. Canada, we've talked specifically about on lots of different levels. Canada is actually a really good case study from a lot of different human geography perspectives. One of them is this devolution idea, where you not only have the French Canadians in the province of Quebec, specifically the area of Montreal, but you also have the Native Canadians, or the Inuit, who are up in Nunavut, specifically, who also have different culture, different language, and they are geographically isolated from, kind of the business and the main action that happens in Canada. And so as a result, the Canadians have given them basically their own province to kind of rule and govern how they see fit. And the Canadian central government, Canada is a federal system, so the Canadian federal government has kind of allowed them to self-govern to a large extent, okay, mostly autonomous. And then in Nigeria, we see similar situations to what we see in the rest, where we have differing kind of tribes and tribal systems competing with each other for certain things. Some have maintained stronger ties to their tribes than they have to the idea of the country of Nigeria. There are some economic differences that we see played out in Nigeria as well, and that kind of exacerbates things, makes things worse, because we see certain areas and certain tribes struggling because they're not as wealthy versus others that are doing really well because they are more wealthy. And as a result, Nigeria has also adopted this whole idea of granting some autonomy to these various regions so that they can make decisions that best fit the citizens within their region. On the other side, when states ultimately disintegrate, when they collapse, that is basically the challenge to sovereignty taken to, the end, basically. So we see kind of indicators of devolution happening before the state actually falls apart. So in the former Soviet Union specifically, we saw a lot of failed revolutions through the 1960s, 1970s, from the satellite states within the Soviet Union's sphere of influence. And the Soviet Union would just come in and kind of crush them and tell them to get in line. And it was not a pleasant situation. The movie that we're going to watch at the end of the year, called Bridge of Spies, actually goes in a lot more detail to what that control by the Soviet Union looked like over those Eastern European satellite states that were sort of part of the Soviet Union, but also sort of their own country. And anyway, it was very complicated. But ultimately, when the state ultimately falls apart and those revolutions are not put down, they're not snuffed out, they are actually successful, that's when we see the state completely fall apart. And that is when that challenge to sovereignty has been completely followed through on, right? Like, not only am I challenging your sovereignty, but I am completely taking it away. And we are going to, sweep everything off the board and start all the way over, which is exactly what happened in the former Soviet Union. Now, Yugoslavia, we talked about this, I think, already, but Yugoslavia is not an example of devolution, because while we did see devolutionary factors kind of percolating in Yugoslavia before everything kind of comes to a head, those devolutionary factors happened very quickly, which led to the breakup of Yugoslavia happening very quickly. We're talking within, probably within 2 years, we see some dissension in the ranks of the different ethnicities within Yugoslavia, and then we see, kind of combat and revolution starting, like actual violence, actual fighting, and then we ultimately see everything kind of dissolving into chaos, Yugoslavia being wiped off the map, and 7 countries taking its place. And so devolution tends to happen much more slowly, and it doesn't necessarily end in the disintegration of a state. Balkanization happens quickly, which is what we refer to when we talk about Yugoslavia, is that Balkanization idea. Balkanization happens quickly. I'm gonna run out of room. Happens quickly, happens due to ethnic reasons, okay, whereas devolution itself doesn't always necessarily involve ethnicity, and happens quickly. So happens quickly, involves ethnic lines or ethnic issues, conflicts, and does result in the disintegration of a state. Okay, devolution happens slowly, happens for lots of reasons beyond just ethnicity, and does not always result in the disintegration of a state. Okay, so that's our differences. All right, supranationalism. This is a really important concept and something that we're going to talk about and see basically throughout the whole rest of the year. Supranationalism occurs when multiple countries form an organization to collectively achieve greater benefits for all members. So when we talk about a supranational organization, that's on the next slide, we're going to go over them, but that is basically where countries come together in some bigger fashion on an international scale, get together and say, hey, we're going to agree to these things because the benefits will benefit everyone if we work together, more so than if we tried to accomplish the same things on our own. Greater strength in numbers, that kind of idea. Global efforts. Now, this is straight out of the course description for this course for AP Human Geography, as it applies to supranationalism. I'm going to read it. It's very big brain, so we're going to have to kind of unpack it and dissect it. Okay, so global efforts to address transnational and environmental challenges, to create economies of scale, trade agreements, and military alliances help to further supranationalism. Okay, so let's unpack what that looks like. So global efforts means many nations are involved. Lots of countries kind of jump on this bandwagon. Global efforts to address transnational and environmental challenges. So transnational and environmental challenges are issues that affect everyone, like climate change. Okay, so this would be things that you can't stop at the border of a state, right? Like climate change happens whether you have a country of Russia or a country of Canada or a country of Denmark or a country of the United States. It doesn't matter, right? Climate change is going to impact everybody. Environmental issues like rising seawaters or pollution, air pollution, water pollution, that kind of stuff, that affects everyone. Okay, it doesn't just stop at the border. So lots of nations involved, and they're focusing specifically on things that affect everybody. Economies of scale. we are going to talk a lot about economies of scale as we get into our next units, specifically Unit 5 when we talk about agriculture and Unit 7 when we talk about development. We will talk a lot about economies of scale. But the idea of economies of scale is that if you buy in bulk, the item price per item is cheaper, okay? So if I need to buy a roll of toilet paper, we'll say, I'm going to go to Walmart and buy a 4-pack of toilet paper, and it's going to cost me $8, okay? Which means each roll of toilet paper is $2. Well, if I go to Costco, where I'm going to buy in bulk, I'm going to buy a pack of toilet paper that has 36 rolls in it, but I'm going to only pay $48 for it, okay? Which means that my 36 rolls of toilet paper, if I do the math, each roll is going to be what? Like $1.50-ish. So if I buy more, the price per item is cheaper than if I buy less. Now, that does mean that I end up with 36 rolls of toilet paper that I'm now going to have to find a place to store, and I'm going to have to ultimately, but toilet paper doesn't go bad. You're always going to need it. You'll use it eventually, right? So the idea of economies of scale is that it's cheaper to buy in bulk. And so if we're talking about economies of scale on a country level, then, well, we'll just stick with our toilet paper example. So let's use the European Union, for example. The European Union is a supranational organization in Europe. Most countries in Europe are members of it, but not all of them. There are some very specific ones that are not part of the European Union. But if the goal is to get the cheapest price that they can on toilet paper, then if you're buying or, marketing, producing toilet paper for all of the people of France versus all of the people of Europe, you're going to be able to get that toilet paper for much cheaper because you're buying more of it and you're dispersing it more widely. So participating in economies of scale on a large scale directly impacts the price that people are going to pay, okay, which is a good thing. The other thing that we see happen with economies of scale is not everybody, and when I say everybody, I'm specifically referring to states, not every state has the same natural resources. So let's say they grow apples in France, but they grow pears in Germany. Well, people in France like pears too, but they're not grown in France. Well, same with Germany. People in Germany like apples too, but they're not grown in Germany. So now all of a sudden, France and Germany are going to look at each other and say, hey, I'll give you some apples if you give me some pears. How does that sound? That sounds great. And as you work on these trade agreements, that works even more efficiently, because now all of a sudden you've got multiple countries working together and everybody's putting their resources into the pot and then dispersing them back out to whoever wants them or needs them. And they're doing it without things like tariffs or taxes or import or export taxes, stuff like that. And so again, it goes back to that it's cheaper for everybody. It benefits from people kind of jumping on this bandwagon of supranational organizations. Another trade agreement, which we will talk specifically about more later, is NAFTA. So NAFTA stands for the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. It's specifically an agreement that the United States has with Canada and Mexico, and it's exactly what I just explained. So certain resources in Canada, certain resources in the United States, certain resources in Mexico, we all trade amongst each other with limited tariffs, limited taxes, easier border crossings to get goods in and out of our countries, headed for each other, right? Headed for Canada or headed for Mexico from the US, that kind of thing, which allows those prices to go down. Good for everybody. And then military alliances. Military alliances is basically where we all see a threat and we want to come together to help each other defend from the threat. So NATO is the example that I've got here. NATO is an organization. It stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's specifically a military treaty organization. It is still in existence. But NATO was formed originally to help defend Europe and the United States against the threat of communism from the Soviet Union. It's a Cold War era creation. So basically saying, all right, all members of NATO are going to help all the other members of NATO fight against communism and against the spread of communism. Okay? So if we look at this again, we've got many nations involved. They focus on issues that are affecting everybody. They try to create things like economies of scale, trade agreements, and military alliances to help further the idea of supranationalism, or the idea where everyone is going to ultimately benefit if they participate in this supranational organization. Okay? As we go through these, I want you to think about this question. How could these organizations challenge a state's sovereignty? Now remember, you have a country that is choosing to participate in whatever supranational organization, right? They have made the choice to join them. So let's kind of go over what the big ones are. And these are the ones that AP Geography has told us that you need to know. So the first and most obvious one is the United Nations. Acronym UN, okay? Its motivation, its goal is political specifically, and it is a peacekeeping entity. It goes into places all over the world in an effort to keep the peace, either within a country or between countries. The second, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization I just talked about, NATO, mutual defense of member states. Now, NATO originally was opposing communism. It still does that, less so from Russia, now more so from places like China. But there are other additional provisions within NATO now too. It's not just about defending against communism, it's about defending against all kinds of other things as well. The European Union, or the EU, political and economic integration of member states, specifically in Europe. Again, I said there are lots. I don't know if you guys noticed the last couple of days in my classroom, there have been colored index cards up on the board. My world geography classes were doing a European Union simulation, and they had to pick a country that was in the European Union and represent them as we debated certain issues. But all of the countries that you saw on the board were members of the European Union. There are requirements and kind of stipulations that countries have to meet in order to be allowed admittance into the European Union. Sometimes that process is a lengthy one. Certain financial provisions you have to meet, certain political provisions you have to meet, that kind of thing. But once you're in the EU specifically looks at political and economic cooperation amongst member states, specifically helping with things like trade and resource exchange, stuff like that. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, political, cultural, economic, and military cooperation and integration of member states. So basically what ASEAN is, think of Southeast Asia. So this is going to be Indonesia and gosh, let me see if I can figure out what the map says. Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Myanmar, Singapore, that area of our globe. ASEAN is basically those countries taking NATO and the EU and putting them together. Okay, so it covers political, cultural, economic, and military cooperation of its member countries. The Arctic Council, we've already talked a little bit about the Arctic Council because we watched the video about the borders. But political cooperation on Arctic issues, both geographic and demographic. And then the African Union, again, similar to what we see with the EU and NATO, its goal is to achieve greater unity, cohesion, and solidarity between the African states and African nations. Notice there is a split out, okay? African states, meaning the borders that were drawn by colonial powers, remember the Berlin Conference, okay? And African nations, meaning the tribal groups that were already present and already in place before the colonial powers showed up and kind of mixed the pot. So it's looking for unity, cohesion, solidarity. Basically, let's all get along kind of idea between African states and African nations. So trying to find a way forward with all of the cultural differences and all of the cultural conflicts that exist within the current borders of the countries of Africa. Okay. On the impact of technology, the internet, social media, and the ease of jet travel have had varied effects on how people relate to each other around the world. So impact of technology, we're just going to quickly go through these. Technology has promoted globalization by connecting people across boundaries, right? You can talk to people all over the world at any time of the day thanks to the internet, right? It has also weakened globalization in some aspects by helping subnational groups organize. So if we look at groups that are looking to maintain or create, right, a nation within the country, and look to kind of rile things up, they can now better collaborate, better communicate, better coordinate, ways to do that because of technology. Supported democratization, moving from autocratic to representative governments by helping reform movements, right? They have access to information. They have access to talking to news coverage from all over the world. They can talk to people from all over the world and realize that what they're experiencing within their country is not how it is everywhere. There are other options, maybe better options, and that has yielded revolutions, movement toward democracies in places that had never existed before, that kind of thing. Created a digital divide between countries with and without access to information for either political or infrastructure reasons. There are some countries around the world, North Korea is a good one, China is a good one, where the governments specifically monitor what kind of information is allowed out to their citizens. They basically censure the internet, a lot of content that's on there, and limit information for their citizens to only be certain things. And most of it is stuff that the government kind of feeds to them. The government produces it, the government organizes it, the government publishes it, puts it out there, in the hope that this additional form of media will help further ingrain their citizens with these ideas. And technology has increased space-time compression, the social and psychological effects of faster movement of information over space in a shorter period of time. I watched a TED Talk the other day about the idea of being bored and how important it is to allow ourselves to be bored. And I was thinking about it, and no one is bored ever, right? Like, if you're bored, the first thing you do is, open your Chromebook or open your laptop or pull out your phone or turn on your TV. Like, we have removed this idea of being bored. And what happens is when we're bored, our brain functions differently. It allows us to kind of take a step back and look at things from a big picture. It allows us to make connections and problem solve and think critically about certain things that we would not otherwise do had we not been bored. And so when we remove this idea of boredom, we're actually making our lives harder. We're making ourselves more anxious. We're making ourselves more depressed because we don't allow our brain the time and the space that it needs in order to make the big connections, do the critical thinking, do the problem solving that we need in order for our lives to function normally and well. And it's because of this space-time compression idea, right? Everything moves faster, we move faster with it, but there is things that are lost because of that fast movement, and things that are important to make sure that we slow down, okay, and make sure that we can still achieve those important components that happens when we go slower. Okay. All right, moving on to topic 4, 10 consequences of centripetal and centrifugal forces. So we're going to start defining what those things are. So a centripetal force is something that unites citizens, something that brings them together. A centrifugal force is something that divides citizens, right? It's the opposite. So we're looking at division for centrifugal, and we're looking at unification for centripetal, coming together versus driving apart. Now, one action can be both forces at once. It depends on your perspective, right? It depends on where you're sitting, what you think. So no factor is always one type of force or the other. Overall, governments attempt to unify states through nation building, through structuring the government in a way that melds the nations within by defining and defending boundaries and through expressing control over all of the territory within those boundaries. However, in Spain, for example, members of the Basque or Catalonian or Galician groups could see the efforts by the Spanish government to promote this concept of, we're all Spanish and everyone should speak Spanish and everyone should be Catholic and we all, have this common history. These other nations within Spain might look at those attempts by the government negatively and actually feel like they are being driven further away from what it means to be Spanish because their cultural heritage, their ethnicity is being minimized in some way, right? And so no factor is always one force or the other. Depending on your perspective, depending on who you are and what your situation is, you may see it as a centripetal force or a centrifugal force, depending. All right. So centrifugal forces that divide. We're just going to briefly, I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to try to speed up. We're going to briefly go over what those look like and some examples of what these division forces are. So the first one is regionalism. Belief or practice of regional administration systems rather than central systems is a political factor that plays a role in creating centrifugal forces. So the idea that in a federal system, regional or local governments create laws that pertain only to them, right? But which is great for that local government, except it might make them feel different, separate from, the state that is somewhere else that has different rules, right? Concentrated minority population or a minority population that is underrepresented or discriminated against, right? Think about the French Canadians in Quebec. Think about the Basque in Spain. Uneven development and or wealth distribution, we can see that happens a lot in your devolution case studies. We saw that happening a lot in Nigeria. And state-shaped, prorupted, fragmented, elongated states always contribute to this idea of regionalism. So prorupted means like you have a state that looks like this, but then it has some weird little piece that like sticks out. Okay. So here's your central government. Everybody around here feels great, but what about these guys over here? They kind of feel a little bit isolated. They may have a federal system in place, and so rules pertain to them, but it kind of makes them feel separate than the rest of the country. Okay, fragmented meaning different islands. So the Philippines is an island nation, and things that happen on this country might be different than things that happen on this country, which makes them feel separate. Okay, this division idea. Chile we've talked about, so you already know that one. Governments use a combination of methods to promote unity. Political, economic, and cultural methods are all used often to promote unity within groups, within their states. So centripetal forces that are political would be seen in these examples. Okay, educated in shared history. So what class did you guys all take last year? You all took U.S. history. So everyone knows who won the Civil War. Everyone knows what the 14th Amendment says. Everyone knows Everyone took the civics test, right? So you are all citizens, or could be citizens of the United States in a very educated way. We've all had the history and we know how things work. Shared political holidays, right? July 4th, yay, happy Independence Day. Veterans Day, Memorial Day, those are political holidays. Nationalism, this strong feeling of one's country. This is that patriotism, that loyalty, that sense of belonging. I'm American. Common laws with common penalties that apply to everyone. Okay. Now, this would be beyond. These are your federal laws, at least in the United States. Laws that apply no matter whether you live in the state of Utah or the state of California or the state of New York or the state of Virginia. It doesn't matter. And then customs and rituals associated with citizenship. Saying the pledge every morning in school, singing the national anthem at sporting events. All of those are political ideas and ways that governments try to bring people together. All right, next one, economic ways. Economic development is one of the most effective centripetal forces. Let me underline that again. Economic is one of the most effective centripetal forces because we all hear money talks, right? You want to make me feel valued? Show me the money. Show me that you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. Don't just give me a whole bunch of rhetoric. Don't just talk about how great I am. Actually, show me the money, okay? And economically, in a political system, what that looks like is infrastructure. Give me reliable transportation systems. Give me reliable communication and other utilities. Give me roads that are well maintained, bridges that are well maintained. Give me access to all different people in all different parts of the country, that we can get there, that the roads are maintained, that they have electricity there, they have sewer systems there, they have Wi-Fi there, right? Everybody should have the same level of infrastructure. Now, that is certainly not the case in many developing countries. They are still working towards this, which, when we're talking about development and centripetal forces, it becomes even more effective, because if you're bringing running water into a village that has never had it before, all of the sudden if you're one of those villagers, you're going to be so grateful and so loyal to the government that made this running water happen, right? All right. So infrastructure, super important, making sure that everyone has access to the same level of stuff, right? We all want stuff. We all want to be able to have the ease of just flipping the light switch on or turning on the stove and making dinner. And when we see that infrastructure being developed within our country, we appreciate that. It brings us together. It makes us loyal and patriotic toward our country. Wealth. It also, really quickly, it also makes us feel like we are as good as the people in the big city or the people in other areas of the country who have already had that, right? So now we're all of a sudden on that same level playing ground. All right, wealth. Increased trade and communication increases wealth within the country, providing stable, profitable lives for citizens. So this is where the idea of, if you manage your economy, if you manage your government, then you have people who can find a job, people who can get an education, people who can support their family, right? All of these different opportunities that are tied to things like wealth and economics, when those exist for the citizens of their country, it makes those citizens happier, and it makes them more loyal and more patriotic toward their country. When wealth distribution is uneven, this can be a centrifugal force, right? And we saw that in Nigeria with the case studies. And centripetal force is cultural. I think this is our last slide. States with homogeneous populations share a common trait, which often brings them together. Okay, so religious holidays or observances. Now remember, we're talking specifically about cultural things. So culture is going to talk about language and religion and shared history, right? Ethnic ties and ethnic history, that kind of stuff. Okay, so religious holidays and observances. So Ramadan in religious countries, Christmases in Christian countries, shared language, shared history, and sometimes even a shared team. So I've got my little thing in here. Go Niners. They beat the Cowboys last week. Hallelujah. I did a little happy dance, I'll be honest. I'm pretty sure they're going to lose to the Packers this week, but that's okay. I'm going to root for them anyway. But we've seen lots and lots of examples through history where some team, and it could be at like a national level team, right? In an Olympic type of setting. But it doesn't have to be. It could be, you know, a soccer team or a basketball team or a football team or whatever that helps unite the people as kind of this shared experience or this shared love for sport. So if you've ever seen the movie Invictus, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I recommend it. It's one of the movies that I toyed with the idea of showing at the end of the year after we're done with the test. But what Invictus is about is it's about the South African rugby team. Now, you guys know from your ethnic conflict gallery walk that South Africa went through quite a tumultuous time transitioning from colonialism to independence and going through what at the time was called apartheid, which is kind of this separation of ethnic groups and specifically races, where you have the European white man who's sort of the minority in the country, but has all the power, has all the authorities, the one who's in the government positions. They're the ones that make the laws. And then you have the majority, Native Africans, Zulu, and other tribes that are kind of having to follow these rules. They're experiencing all kinds of discrimination because of their race, because of their ethnicity, and it gets really bad. Lots of violence. But there is a South African rugby team, and they are white and they are black. They have a colonial heritage and they have a Native African heritage, and they all kind of come together and play rugby. And the entire country of South Africa gets behind this team. Everybody. The European colonists are the ones that have that as their background. The Native Africans, Native Zulu tribe, and Native South Africans, they all kind of get behind this team, and it is this unifying force within the country of South Africa. So sport has the ability to kind of bring people together in that way as well. And, with the Olympics starting up here in a couple weeks, yay, I think we're like, 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks out. It's going to be really fun to see, we start tracking medal count by country. We start seeing, certain athletes that we love to watch and, seeing if they can do it again, or, brand new athletes this is their first Olympics. And we just kind of get behind Team USA. And it's, again, this idea of having a shared team and that bringing people together. All right, that is it. We are going to stop there. I will get this uploaded to YouTube, and hopefully it is not too long, not too bad. All right.